December 17, 1944, 6 miles east of the twin villages of Krinkelt and Rocherath, Belgium. The frozen earth trembles beneath the weight of approaching armor as dawn breaks gray and bitter over the Ardennes forest. Through the dense canopy of pine and oak, shadows move with mechanical precision. The silhouettes of panzer foes and panthers grinding forward through snow that crunches like broken glass beneath their tracks. The air carries the acrid smell of diesel exhaust mixed with cordite, while the temperature hovers at -15 degrees Fahrenheit. German Obersturmbannführer Helmut Zeiner peers through the morning mist from his command tank, watching his column of 3 panzers and 40 panzer grenadiers prepare for what should be a simple breakthrough operation. The forest ahead appears empty, lifeless, exactly as Wehrmacht intelligence had promised. Behind him stretches the entire weight of the 6th Panzer Army's offensive, 410,000 men and over 1,400 tanks committed to Hitler's desperate gamble to split the Allied armies and reach the port of Antwerp. For 24 hours, German forces have been smashing through what their commanders dismissed as positions held by nothing more than a couple of bank managers and Jew boys, WWII Americans of the 99th Infantry Division. Yet, as Zeiner's panzers emerge from the tree line into the killing fields before Krinkelt, something is wrong. The silence is too complete, too deliberate. From foxholes carved into the frozen Belgian soil, American riflemen watch through the gray morning light as the German armor advances. These are not the scattered remnants of a broken division that German intelligence had predicted. These are the men of the 2nd Infantry Division, veterans of Normandy and the breakout at St. Vith, who have spent the night in a fighting withdrawal to prepared positions. In their frozen hands they clutch K-ration breakfast tins, ham and eggs, biscuits, and coffee that still steams in the bitter air, the simple abundance of American logistics that would become the symbol of everything the Wehrmacht had underestimated about their enemy. To understand why German commanders so catastrophically misjudged what awaited them in the Ardennes, one must return to the strategic situation that drove Hitler to authorize Operation Wacht am Rhein, Watch on the Rhine. By December 1944, the Third Reich stood on the precipice of collapse. The Red Army had shattered Army Group Center and was advancing toward the German homeland from the east. In the west, Allied forces had broken out of Normandy, liberated Paris, and were pressing against the Siegfried Line, the 400-mile chain of fortifications, bunkers, barbed wire, and tank traps that Hitler had ordered built in the 1930s. Germany's strategic reserves were nearly exhausted, her veteran divisions reduced to skeleton crews, and her industrial capacity was crumbling under round-the-clock Allied bombing. Yet Hitler, in his Alpine retreat at the Berghof, remained convinced that a single, decisive blow could still alter the course of the war. His reasoning was not entirely without merit. The Western Allies had outrun their supply lines in the autumn advance, and logistical constraints had forced them to pause their offensive operations. The only major port in Allied hands was Cherbourg, thoroughly wrecked by German demolitions, while Antwerp, captured intact in September, would not become operational until November 28th. American and British forces were stretched thin across a 400-mile front, with many divisions rotating into quiet sectors to rest and refit after the savage fighting in the Hürtgen forest. The Ardennes represented the thinnest stretch of this extended Allied line. Here, in the dense forests of southern Belgium and Luxembourg, the Americans maintained what military planners euphemistically called an economy of force deployment. The 99th Infantry Division, freshly arrived from the United States and inexperienced in combat, held a 19-mile front, nearly 3 times the recommended span for a single division. To their south, the equally depleted 28th Infantry Division, nicknamed the Bloody Bucket for its losses in the Hürtgen forest, stretched across another 25 miles of forested terrain. These positions consisted not of continuous lines, but of scattered platoon-sized strongpoints, too far apart to provide mutual support, connected by nothing more than forest trails and radio communications. German intelligence, studying this deployment, concluded that the Ardennes sector represented the perfect point for a breakthrough operation. The terrain, characterized by dense woods and few roads, appeared unsuitable for armored warfare, precisely why the Allies had chosen to defend it so lightly. Hitler's plan was audacious in its scope. 3 German armies would smash through the American lines, drive to the Meuse River, and capture Antwerp within a week. This would physically split the British and American armies, creating a political crisis that might force the Western Allies to negotiate a separate peace, allowing Germany to concentrate all her remaining strength against the Soviet Union. The German forces assembled for this offensive represented the last strategic reserve of the Wehrmacht. The 6th Panzer Army, commanded by SS Oberstgruppenführer Joseph Sepp Dietrich, formed the main striking force with 2 SS Panzer Corps equipped with the finest remaining tanks and artillery pieces Germany could provide. The 5th Panzer Army under General Hasso von Manteuffel would advance on the left flank, while the 7th Army under General Erich Brandenberger would protect the southern shoulder of the advance. In total, the Germans committed over 10,000 men, 2,400 tanks and assault guns, 2,600 artillery pieces, and more than 1,000 combat aircraft to the operation. What German commanders expected to encounter in the Ardennes was an American army they fundamentally misunderstood. In their minds, these were not the battle-hardened veterans who had fought their way across Western Europe, but rather inexperienced conscripts led by officers who had learned warfare from textbooks rather than battlefields. SS Oberführer Friedrich von der Heydte, tasked with dropping paratroopers behind American lines, was told by Dietrich that the American positions were held by a couple of bank managers and Jew boys. This assessment, poisoned by Nazi racial ideology and wishful thinking, would prove to be one of the war's most disastrous intelligence failures. The reality that awaited the Wehrmacht in the pre-dawn darkness of December 16, 1944, was something entirely different. The 99th Infantry Division, though inexperienced, was composed of intelligent, well-trained young Americans who had spent months preparing for combat. Their ranks included college graduates, skilled tradesmen, and men who had chosen military service over cushy jobs in defense plants. More importantly, they were supported by the most sophisticated military-industrial complex the world had ever seen, while German soldiers advanced with weapons that had been manufactured in slave labor camps by malnourished prisoners, often with defective materials and shoddy workmanship. Their American counterparts carried rifles, machine guns, and equipment produced by the arsenal of democracy. The M1 Garand rifle, with its 8-round clip and rapid rate of fire, gave individual American infantrymen a significant advantage over German soldiers armed with bolt-action Mauser rifles. American artillery, coordinated by sophisticated fire control systems and supported by spotter aircraft, could deliver devastating concentrations of fire with an accuracy and speed that German gunners could not match. But perhaps most importantly, these American soldiers carried in their field packs something that would become the symbol of the fundamental difference between the two armies: K rations. These rectangular cardboard boxes containing breakfast, dinner, and supper meals represented more than simple sustenance. Each K ration provided 2,130 calories per day, more food than many German soldiers had seen in weeks. The breakfast ration alone contained chopped ham and eggs, biscuits, soluble coffee, a fruit bar, 4 cigarettes, chewing gum, water purification tablets, and even toilet paper. To German soldiers, many of whom had not received regular rations in days and were subsisting on black bread and ersatz coffee, the abundance contained in a single American field ration was almost incomprehensible. When Wehrmacht units overran American positions in the opening days of the offensive, German soldiers often abandoned their military objectives to gorge themselves on captured American food supplies. Photographs from the battle show German prisoners clutching K-ration cans like precious treasures, their hollow-eyed faces speaking to months of inadequate nutrition. The contrast extended far beyond individual equipment. While German armor units began their offensive with fuel tanks only partially filled, knowing they would have to capture American gasoline supplies to continue their advance. American supply columns maintained a constant flow of fuel, ammunition, food, and medical supplies to frontline units. The famous Red Ball Express, the trucking network that had supplied Allied forces across France, had evolved into a sophisticated logistics system capable of supporting major combat operations even in the difficult terrain of the Ardennes. Yet for all their material advantages, the American forces in the Ardennes faced a genuine crisis in those first hours of the German offensive. At 0500 hours on December 16, 1944, over 2,600 German artillery pieces opened fire simultaneously along an 80-mile front. The barrage, the largest German artillery concentration since the opening of Operation Barbarossa, shattered the morning stillness and announced to the world that Hitler was making his final gambit in the West. The initial German assault achieved complete tactical surprise. American units, scattered across their extended front lines, found themselves under attack by forces they had not known existed. Radio communications broke down under the intensity of the bombardment, leaving company and battalion commanders isolated and uncertain of the tactical situation. In many sectors, German infantry advanced through the forest under cover of darkness, infiltrating between American strongpoints and emerging in rear areas where supply units and command posts had considered themselves safe. At Losheim, the intelligence and reconnaissance platoon of the 394th Infantry Regiment, just 18 men under Staff Sergeant Kenneth Bokelheide, found themselves directly in the path of an entire German division. For nearly 20 hours, these 18 Americans held their hilltop position above the village, calling down artillery fire on advancing German columns and disrupting the timetable for the entire southern wing of the German offensive. When they were finally overrun, only 4 men remained alive and unwounded. But their sacrifice had delayed the advance of Kampfgruppe Peiper by a full day. Similar scenes of desperate resistance played out across the Ardennes as American units, cut off and outnumbered, chose to fight rather than surrender. At Hofen, the 3rd Battalion of the 395th Infantry Regiment repelled repeated attacks by German armor and infantry, inflicting 554 German casualties while suffering only 5 killed and 7 wounded. At the twin villages of Krinkelt and Rocherath, the 2nd Infantry Division conducted a fighting withdrawal that military historians would later describe as one of the finest examples of tactical leadership in the European theater. But it was the battle for what became known as the North Shoulder of the German offensive that would ultimately determine the fate of Operation Wacht am Rhein. Here, where the 99th and 2nd Infantry Divisions held the crucial high ground of Elsenborn Ridge, the German 6th Panzer Army expected to achieve its primary breakthrough. The plan called for SS Panzer divisions to smash through the American lines, seize the vital road network around the twin villages, and drive west to the Meuse River crossings. Major General Walter Robertson, commanding the 2nd Infantry Division, recognized immediately that the survival of both American divisions depended on holding the twin villages long enough to conduct an organized withdrawal to Elsenborn Ridge. This meant executing one of the most difficult military maneuvers possible, a daylight withdrawal while in contact with an aggressive enemy. Robertson later described his plan as a skin-the-cat maneuver, with his forward battalions moving south through the villages while other units provided covering fire from prepared positions. The German attack on the twin villages began before dawn on December 17th, led by the 12th SS Panzer Division under SS Standartenführer Hugo Kraas. These were among the best trained and equipped troops Germany could still field, veterans of the Eastern Front who had been pulled back to refit with new tanks and equipment. Their objective was simple: break through the American lines and seize the road. Network that would allow the entire 6th Panzer Army to pour west toward Antwerp. What they encountered instead was a carefully orchestrated defense that showcased the American military's greatest strengths: tactical flexibility, superior communications, and an abundance of supporting fires. As German panzers advanced through the morning mist, they found themselves channeled into killing zones where American tank destroyers and artillery observers waited with pre-planned fire missions. The M10 tank destroyers, with their high-velocity 76mm guns, could penetrate the armor of any German tank at the ranges imposed by the forest terrain. More importantly, American artillery demonstrated a level of coordination and effectiveness that German commanders had not anticipated. Lieutenant John Granville, serving as artillery liaison officer with the 1st Battalion, 9th Infantry Regiment, was given priority access to 4 battalions of divisional artillery and 3 battalions of Corps 150mm howitzers. When German armor and infantry launched their main assault on the American positions, Granville called down what survivors described as the heaviest artillery barrage they had ever witnessed. The concentration was so intense that German veterans later compared it to the massive Soviet barrages they had experienced on the Eastern Front. The battle for the Twin Villages raged for 2 days and 3 nights, with neither side able to achieve a decisive advantage. German forces repeatedly penetrated the American perimeter, with individual panzers and groups of panzer grenadiers fighting their way into the villages themselves. American defenders, many of them cooks, clerks, and support personnel pressed into service as riflemen, fought from house to house with bazookas, rifle grenades, and whatever weapons they could find. Throughout this desperate fighting, the K-ration remained a constant presence, not just as sustenance, but as a symbol of the fundamental differences between the two armies. While German soldiers fought on empty stomachs, often going days without hot food, American infantrymen could count on regular meals even in the midst of combat. The psychological impact of this abundance extended far beyond simple nutrition. These small cardboard boxes represented a supply system that could deliver food to individual soldiers even in the deepest forests of Belgium, a logistical capability that spoke to the industrial might of a nation that had not known invasion or strategic bombing. German prisoners, interrogated in the aftermath of the battle, consistently mentioned their amazement at American supply arrangements. One captured Wehrmacht officer noted that American soldiers seemed to consider K-rations inadequate rations, often trading away portions they found unpalatable, while German troops would have considered such meals a feast. This abundance was not lost on German morale, as word spread through their ranks that the Americans seemed to have unlimited supplies of everything from food to ammunition to winter clothing. The symbolic power of the K-ration was perhaps most evident in the contrast it provided to German expectations of American character. Nazi propaganda had portrayed Americans as soft, materialistic civilians who would collapse under the pressure of serious combat. Yet, here were American soldiers sharing their food with German prisoners, heating K-rations over small fires, while artillery shells exploded nearby, maintaining their humanity and their supply discipline even in the midst of the war's most brutal fighting. By December 19th, it had become clear to German commanders that the breakthrough they had expected was not materializing. The 6th Panzer Army, which was supposed to be racing west toward the Meuse River, remained locked in combat around Elsenborn Ridge and the Twin Villages. The carefully planned timetable for the entire offensive had collapsed, with German units falling days behind their prescribed schedules. Most critically, the failure to capture the road. Network in the north had created massive traffic jams as 3 German armies tried to funnel their forces through inadequate routes in the southern sectors of the offensive. The Americans, meanwhile, had used the time gained by their forward units' sacrifice to bring up reinforcements and establish strong defensive positions. The 1st Infantry Division arrived to extend the defensive line around Elsenborn Ridge, while the 82nd and 101st Airborne Divisions were rushed north from their rest areas to block German advances toward Bastogne and other critical objectives. American air power, grounded for the first days of the offensive by overcast weather, began to take a devastating toll on German supply columns as clearing skies allowed fighter bombers to attack the massive traffic jams created by the delayed advance. The transformation in German expectations was profound and demoralizing. What had begun as a confident advance by troops told they were facing dispirited rear echelon units had become a grinding battle of attrition against an enemy that seemed to possess unlimited resources. German soldiers, many of whom had not received adequate winter clothing, watched American prisoners being evacuated in heated ambulances while they themselves huddled in foxholes with inadequate rations and medical supplies. The psychological impact of this reversal extended far beyond the immediate tactical situation. For German officers who had experienced the lightning victories of 1939–1941, the stubborn American resistance in the Ardennes represented a fundamental shift in the character of the war. These were not the French or Polish armies that had collapsed under the weight of blitzkrieg tactics, but rather forces that seemed to grow stronger under pressure, drawing on reserves of men and material that appeared inexhaustible. Captain Charles MacDonald, commanding Company I of the 23rd Infantry Regiment, later wrote about the surreal experience of conducting a fighting withdrawal while German artillery shells exploded around his positions. His men, many of them barely 20 years old, shared their K-rations with wounded German prisoners while planning their next defensive positions. The American abundance that the K-ration represented had become so internalized that these soldiers could not conceive of an enemy that might be fighting on empty stomachs or with inadequate equipment. The true measure of German miscalculation became evident in the aftermath of Kampfgruppe Peiper's advance through American lines. This elite SS formation, equipped with the most modern German tanks and commanded by one of the Wehrmacht's most aggressive officers, had been tasked with seizing bridges across the Meuse River and opening the route to Antwerp. Yet within days of beginning their advance, Peiper's forces found themselves cut off and running low on fuel, ammunition, and food. When Peiper's men finally abandoned their vehicles and attempted to escape on foot, American forces found the discarded panzers still loaded with German personal equipment and documents. Among these materials were letters home from German soldiers expressing amazement at the quantity and quality of American equipment they had captured. One soldier wrote to his family about discovering an American field kitchen that contained more food than his entire company had seen in weeks. Another described American winter uniforms as being superior to anything the Wehrmacht had ever issued. The failure of the Ardennes offensive marked more than just a tactical defeat for Germany. It represented the final collapse of Wehrmacht confidence in their ability to match American material superiority through superior tactics and training. German veterans of the Eastern Front, accustomed to fighting an enemy that matched them in brutality if not in equipment, found themselves facing an army that combined overwhelming material advantages with tactical sophistication and unshakable morale. The K-rations that American soldiers consumed throughout the battle became, in many ways, the perfect symbol of this mismatch. Here was an army that could deliver hot coffee and cigarettes to individual riflemen in the deepest forests of Belgium, that could evacuate wounded soldiers in heated ambulances, and that could call down artillery barrages of unprecedented accuracy and intensity. Against such capabilities, the Wehrmacht's traditional advantages in training and experience proved inadequate. As the German offensive ground to a halt in the forests around Bastogne and the high ground of Elsenborn Ridge, the broader implications of this failure became clear to both sides. The United States had demonstrated that it could absorb a surprise attack by Germany's best remaining forces and respond with a counteroffensive that would drive German armies back across the Rhine. the arsenal of democracy had proven that it could not only outproduce the Axis powers, but could also outfight them in the field. The aftermath of the Battle of the Bulge saw American forces advancing into Germany itself, supported by supply lines that stretched back across the Atlantic to the factories of Detroit and Pittsburgh. German resistance, though often fierce, lacked the cohesion and confidence that had characterized Wehrmacht operations in earlier years. The knowledge that American artillery could deliver devastating firepower on demand, that American wounded would receive immediate medical attention, and that American soldiers would never lack for food or ammunition had a profoundly demoralizing effect on German morale. Perhaps most symbolically, as American forces crossed the Rhine and advanced toward Berlin, they continued to carry K-rations in their field packs. These simple cardboard boxes, with their contents of ham and eggs, biscuits and coffee, had become more than just military rations. They represented the capacity of democratic society to sustain modern warfare, to maintain the humanity of its soldiers even in the midst of brutal combat, and to project power across vast distances while never losing sight of the individual human needs of the men who did the fighting. German prisoners, marched to rear areas under American guard, often remarked on the casual abundance with which their captors treated supplies that would have been precious commodities in the Wehrmacht. American soldiers discarded partially eaten K-rations, shared cigarettes with prisoners, and seemed genuinely puzzled when German soldiers hoarded small items like soap or candy that American logistics could replace within hours. The transformation of German expectations was perhaps most evident in the post-battle interviews conducted with captured Wehrmacht officers. General Sepp Dietrich, commander of the 6th Panzer Army, admitted that German intelligence had fundamentally misunderstood the character of American forces. The bank managers and Jew boys that his staff had dismissed had proven to be formidable opponents, capable of tactical innovation under pressure, and supported by a logistics system that German planners had not believed possible. Colonel Friedrich von der Heydte, whose paratrooper unit had been tasked with disrupting American reinforcements, later wrote that the failure of the Ardennes offensive marked the moment when he realized that Germany could not win the war through military means alone. The American army his forces had encountered was not just better equipped, but better led, better trained, and better motivated than German intelligence had predicted. Most importantly, it was backed by a society that seemed capable of indefinite expansion of its military efforts. The final irony of the Battle of the Bulge lay in the German army's discovery that their enemies possessed not only superior material resources, but also superior tactical doctrine. American commanders like General Robertson of the 2nd Infantry Division had demonstrated a flexibility and aggression that matched anything in German military tradition. The fighting withdrawal from the Twin Villages to Elsenborn Ridge, conducted under enemy fire and in the face of overwhelming odds, became a textbook example of combined arms tactics that German military schools would study for decades after the war. As the survivors of the German offensive retreated across the Belgian countryside in January 1945, many carried with them captured American K-rations, not just as food, but as talismans of an enemy that had proven unexpectedly formidable. These small cardboard boxes, mass-produced in American factories and distributed through a supply chain that spanned continents, had become symbols of the fundamental transformation that had occurred in the character of warfare itself. The America that had entered World War II as an industrial giant but military amateur had evolved into a superpower capable of projecting decisive force anywhere in the world. The K-rations that sustained its soldiers represented more than just efficient logistics. They embodied the marriage of democratic values with industrial capacity that would define the post-war world. In the frozen forests of the Ardennes, German soldiers had encountered not just a better-equipped enemy, but the vanguard of a new form of warfare that combined overwhelming material superiority with tactical excellence and unshakable moral confidence. The Battle of the Bulge marked the final moment when the German military could sustain the illusion that superior tactics and training might compensate for material disadvantage. The American forces that emerged from the forests of Belgium in January 1945 had proven that democratic societies could not only match totalitarian regimes in industrial production, but could exceed them in military effectiveness. The K-rations they carried became symbols of a new reality, that free peoples, properly organized and equipped, could defeat any enemy that sought to impose tyranny through force of arms. In the end, the Germans had been certain that the Ardennes was impenetrable, not because of the terrain, but because they could not conceive that their enemies possessed the will, the skill, and the resources to break through their carefully planned defenses. When American columns emerged from the morning mist on December 17, 1944, they brought with them not just superior firepower, but a demonstration of the industrial and moral superiority of democratic civilization. The Wehrmacht had expected to face bank managers and citizen soldiers. Instead, they encountered the finest army that American democracy had ever produced, sustained by K-rations and supplied by the arsenal of democracy, advancing with the irresistible momentum of a free people determined to preserve their way of life. The small cardboard boxes that American soldiers discarded along the roads of Belgium became monuments to a truth that would echo through the remainder of the 20th century. That abundance, properly organized and directed by democratic institutions, represents a form of power that authoritarian regimes can neither match nor comprehend. In the Ardennes forest, where German commanders had expected easy victory, they discovered instead the emergence of American military power as a decisive force in world history. A power symbolized not by grand gestures or ideological slogans, but by the simple reality that American soldiers would never lack for food, ammunition, or medical care as long as their nation's industrial capacity remained intact. The mist that lifted from the Ardennes on that December morning in 1944 revealed more than just American infantry columns advancing to contact. It revealed the future of warfare itself, in which material abundance, technological superiority, and democratic values would combine to create military forces capable of defeating any enemy that chose to challenge the free world. The K-rations scattered across the Belgian countryside became the first artifacts of this new era. Small, prosaic reminders that the America that had seemed so distant and irrelevant to German planners possessed the capacity to project its power across oceans and sustain its forces in the field until victory was achieved. When the Battle of the Bulge finally ended on January 25, 1945, with German forces in full retreat toward the Siegfried Line, the transformation was complete. The Wehrmacht, once the most feared military force in the world, had been broken not just by superior numbers, but by superior organization, logistics, and morale. The Americans they had dismissed as bank managers and Jew boys had proven to be soldiers of the first order. Supported by a society that understood that victory in modern warfare required not just courage and skill, but the full mobilization of industrial democracy in service of freedom's cause. The K-rations that sustained these soldiers throughout their advance, from the Ardennes to the Rhine, became enduring symbols of American military power, not because they represented technological sophistication, but because they embodied the simple truth that a free people, properly equipped and led, could defeat any tyranny that sought to challenge them. In the bitter cold of a Belgian winter, sustained by canned ham and soluble coffee, American democracy had proven its capacity to defend itself against the most ruthless and capable enemies that totalitarianism could produce. The mist that had concealed the American advance had lifted to reveal not just military columns, but the dawn of a new era in which democratic abundance would prove to be the decisive factor in the struggle between freedom and tyranny.